A racist manager named James Sterling humiliates a black family at a luxury hotel. Minutes later, they hand him a note that reveals a shocking truth. What is written on the note, and how will it change James's life forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. James Sterling strode through the gleaming lobby of the Grand Plaza Hotel, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He stood tall, his crisp suit a symbol of his authority. The bustling atmosphere of the hotel filled him with a sense of pride. This was his domain, and he ruled it with an iron fist. "Mr. Sterling," a young bellhop greeted him nervously. James barely nodded in response. He had no time for pleasantries with the staff. His eyes scanned the lobby, looking for any imperfection that might tarnish the hotel's five-star reputation. "Lisa," he called sharply to the front desk manager. "Why isn't Mr. Rothschild's suite ready yet? He'll be here in an hour." Lisa's face paled. "I'm sorry, sir. We had a small delay with—" "I don't want excuses," James cut her off. "I want results. Get it done. Now." He turned on his heel, leaving Lisa scrambling to follow his orders. James felt a twinge of satisfaction. This was how a top-tier hotel should be run, with precision and excellence. As he made his way to his office, James overheard a conversation between two housekeepers. "Did you hear? The CEO of Global Tech is staying here this week," one whispered excitedly. "Shh," the other hushed. "Mr. Sterling will have our heads if we gossip about the guests." James allowed himself a small smile. His staff knew the rules. Discretion was key in their line of work. In his office, James reviewed the day's schedule. A long list of VIP arrivals awaited him. He felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, but it was a burden he welcomed. After all, wasn't this what he had worked so hard for? A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he barked. A timid-looking new employee entered, clutching a clipboard. "Mr. Sterling, I have the updated guest list for you." James snatched the clipboard without a word of thanks. He scanned the names, his brow furrowing. "Who approved the Johnsons for the presidential suite?" he demanded. The employee stuttered. I'm not sure, sir. Should I check?" "Yes, you should check," James said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "And while you're at it, remind everyone that I make the final decisions on suite assignments. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling, crystal clear," the employee said, practically running out of the office. James sighed and leaned back in his chair. It wasn't easy being in charge, but someone had to maintain standards, and James Sterling was just the man for the job. As James Sterling surveyed the lobby from his vantage point near the elevators, his eyes fell upon a family approaching the front desk. The Williams family exuded an air of quiet elegance that caught his attention immediately. Mr. Williams, tall and distinguished in a perfectly tailored suit, stood with impeccable posture. His wife, Mrs. Williams, wore a stylish dress that spoke of refined taste. Between them, their young son fidgeted slightly, though he was dressed just as smartly as his parents in a miniature version of his father's attire. James's brow furrowed as he watched them approach the check-in counter. Something about their presence made him uneasy, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. He found himself moving closer, ostensibly to oversee the check-in process. As he drew near, he overheard snippets of their conversation with Lisa, the front desk manager. "Welcome to the Grand Plaza Hotel, Mr. and Mrs. Williams," Lisa greeted them warmly. "We have your reservation for the executive suite ready." James's eyebrows shot up in surprise. The executive suite? Surely there must be some mistake. He quickly stepped in, a forced smile on his face. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice clipped. "I'm James Sterling, the hotel manager. Is there any problem here?" Mrs. Williams turned to him with a gracious smile. "No problem at all, Mr. Sterling. Your staff has been lovely." James nodded curtly, his eyes darting between the family and Lisa. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was amiss. The Williams family certainly looked the part of wealthy guests, but James prided himself on his ability to spot those who didn't quite belong. "Lisa," he said, his voice low. "A word, please?" As Lisa stepped aside with him, James glanced back at the Williams family. Mr. Williams was now kneeling down, adjusting his son's tie with gentle hands. Mrs. Williams watched them both with a loving smile. "Lisa," James whispered urgently, "are you certain about the executive suite for them?" He tilted his head subtly towards the family. Lisa's brow creased in confusion. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, the reservation was made weeks ago. Is there a problem?" James hesitated, his prejudices warring with the evidence before his eyes. The Williams family certainly looked affluent, but something in him refused to believe it. "Just keep an eye on them," he muttered finally. "Make sure everything is in order." As he turned back to the family, James plastered on his most professional smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I hope you enjoy your stay with us," he said, his tone not quite matching the warmth of his words. James Sterling strode purposefully towards the front desk, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. As he approached, he cleared his throat loudly, causing the Williams family to turn and face him. "Excuse me," James said, his voice carrying across the lobby. "I couldn't help but overhear that you're checking into the executive suite. Are you quite sure that's the correct reservation?" Mr. Williams furrowed his brow, confusion evident on his face. "Yes, we're certain. Is there a problem?" James let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Well, you see, the executive suite is our most prestigious accommodation. It comes with a rather substantial price tag." He emphasized the word substantial, his eyes sweeping over the family with barely concealed doubt. Mrs. Williams stepped forward, her chin held high. "We're well aware of the cost, Mr. Sterling. We made this reservation weeks ago." James persisted, his voice growing louder. "I see. And you're absolutely certain you can afford such a luxurious stay? We wouldn't want any misunderstandings when it comes time to settle the bill." The lobby had grown quiet, other guests and staff watching the uncomfortable exchange. The Williams' young son shifted nervously, clinging to his mother's hand. Mr. Williams took a deep breath, his voice steady despite the hurt in his eyes. "Mr. Sterling, I assure you we are more than capable of affording our stay. Your assumptions are not only incorrect, but deeply offensive." James faltered for a moment, taken aback by Mr. Williams's composure, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "I'm simply doing my job, sir. We have to be careful about who we allow into our most exclusive suites." Mrs. Williams placed a gentle hand on her husband's arm. "Darling, perhaps we should consider staying elsewhere. I'm not sure I feel comfortable in an establishment where we're judged based on appearance rather than our reservation." The young boy looked up at his parents, his eyes wide with confusion and hurt. "Mommy, why doesn't the man want us to stay here? Did we do something wrong?" James felt a twinge of discomfort at the child's innocent question, but he pushed it aside. He stood his ground, arms crossed, waiting for the family to admit their mistake or leave. Mr. Williams reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. With a gentle smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he extended his hand towards James. "Mr. Sterling," he said softly, "I believe this might be of interest to you." James looked at the note with disdain, barely concealing an eye roll. He snatched the paper from Mr. Williams' hand, not bothering to unfold it as he stuffed it carelessly into his pocket. "Thank you," James replied curtly, his tone making it clear he had no intention of reading whatever was written inside. "I hope you enjoy your stay, should you choose to remain with us." Mr. Williams nodded, a look of quiet disappointment crossing his face. He turned to his family, placing a comforting hand on his son's shoulder. "Come on, let's go to our room." As the Williams family walked away, their luggage trailing behind them, James watched with a sense of smug satisfaction. He straightened his tie and smoothed down his jacket, feeling proud of how he had handled the situation. "That's how you maintain standards," he muttered to himself, turning back to the front desk. For the rest of the day, James went about his usual routine. He barked orders at the staff, inspected every corner of the hotel for imperfections, and greeted the guests he deemed worthy with forced smiles and rehearsed pleasantries. Every now and then his hand would brush against the folded note in his pocket, but he paid it no mind. In his mind, he had done his job, protecting the hotel's reputation and ensuring only the right kind of guests were treated with respect. As evening approached, James stood in the lobby, surveying his domain with a sense of pride. He had successfully navigated another day, maintaining the high standards he believed were essential to the hotel's success. The crumpled note lay forgotten in his pocket, its contents unread and its potential impact unrealized. As the evening wore on, James continued his rounds through the hotel, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floors. He paused at the front desk, scrutinizing the staff's appearance and efficiency with a critical eye. "Thompson," he barked at a young receptionist, "straighten your tie. This isn't a backyard barbecue." The young man fumbled with his tie, his face flushing red. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Sorry, sir." James nodded curtly and moved on, but he couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. The encounter with the Williams family kept replaying in his mind, like a stubborn echo he couldn't silence. He made his way to the hotel restaurant where the dinner service was in full swing. The clinking of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation filled the air. James scanned the room, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a waiter carrying a tray of drinks. "Careful with those glasses," he snapped. "One slip and it's coming out of your paycheck." The waiter nodded nervously, gripping the tray tighter as he hurried past. James watched him go, feeling a twinge of satisfaction at the fear he inspired. But as he turned to leave, he caught sight of the Williams family seated at a corner table. They were laughing together, the young boy's eyes shining with joy as his parents smiled warmly at him. For a moment, James felt a pang of something. Regret? Doubt? He quickly pushed the feeling aside. Throughout the evening, James found his gaze drawn to the Williams family whenever they were in view. He watched as they interacted with other guests and staff, always with grace and kindness. It was a stark contrast to his own behavior, and it left him feeling unsettled. As he walked through the lobby later that night, James overheard a conversation between two guests. "Did you meet the Williams family?" one woman asked her companion. "Such lovely people. I heard Mr. Williams is a renowned businessman." James froze mid-step, his hand unconsciously moving to the pocket where the unread note still lay. A surgeon? Could it be possible he had misjudged them so completely? Later that evening, as the hotel's bustling activity began to wind down, James made his way to his office. He sat heavily in his leather chair, exhaustion settling over him like a thick blanket. As he reached for his jacket, preparing to head home, his fingers brushed against something in his pocket. The note. With a frown, James pulled out the folded piece of paper. He had completely forgotten about it in the chaos of the day. Now, curiosity gnawed at him. What could Mr. Williams have possibly wanted to say? With slightly trembling hands, James unfolded the note. His eyes widened as he began to read. "Dear Mr. Sterling, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to take a moment to introduce myself properly. My name is Robert Williams, and I am the majority shareholder and chairman of the board for this hotel chain. My family and I have been traveling incognito, visiting our various properties to observe the day-to-day operations and guest experiences firsthand. We believe this is the best way to truly understand how our hotels are functioning and where improvements can be made. I must say our experience today has been enlightening." James felt the blood drain from his face. His hands shook as he continued reading, each word hitting him like a physical blow. The realization of what he had done, of how he had treated the very people who owned the hotel, made him feel sick to his stomach. He slumped back in his chair, the letter falling from his limp fingers. How could he have been so blind? So judgmental? The shame washed over him in waves, threatening to drown him in its intensity. James stared at the fallen letter, his mind reeling from the revelation. The weight of his actions crashed down upon him, leaving him breathless. He had treated the Williams family with such disrespect, and now he realized the true magnitude of his mistake. With shaking hands, he picked up the letter again, forcing himself to read the final paragraph. "Mr. Sterling, I will be reporting my experience to the board. Your behavior today was not only unprofessional but deeply hurtful. It saddens me to think that other guests may have been subjected to similar treatment." James felt his stomach churn, The shame was overwhelming, threatening to consume him whole. He had always prided himself on running a tight ship, on maintaining the highest standards of service. But now he saw that his prejudices had blinded him to true hospitality. He replayed the scene from earlier in his mind, seeing it through new eyes. The Williams family's dignified composure in the face of his rudeness, their grace under pressure. And all the while, they were the owners of the very establishment he thought he was protecting. James buried his face in his hands, hot tears of shame pricking at his eyes. How many other guests had he misjudged? How many times had his snap decisions and harsh words hurt innocent people? The guilt was a physical ache in his chest. He had always believed he was doing what was best for the hotel, but now he saw the truth. His actions had not only been morally wrong, but could potentially damage the hotel's reputation. As the reality of the situation sank in, James felt a deep fear take root. His career, everything he had worked so hard for, was now hanging by a thread. And it was all because of his own prejudiced behavior. James took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves as he approached the hotel's elegant restaurant. His eyes scanned the room, finally spotting the Williams family seated at a corner table. They were engaged in quiet conversation, their young son coloring happily on a placemat. With each step, James felt the weight of his earlier actions pressing down on him. His heart raced as he drew closer to their table. When he reached them, he cleared his throat softly. "Mr. and Mrs. Williams," he began, his voice wavering slightly. "I hope I'm not interrupting. May I speak with you for a moment?" Mr. Williams looked up, his expression guarded. Mrs. Williams placed a protective hand on her son's shoulder. The tension was palpable. "Mr. Sterling," Mr. Williams said coolly, "what can we do for you?" James swallowed hard. I wanted to apologize for my behavior earlier today. It was completely unacceptable, and I am deeply ashamed of how I treated you and your family." He paused, fighting back tears. "I made unfair assumptions based on nothing but my own prejudices. I was wrong, and I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you." Mr. Williams studied James for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then, to James's surprise, he gestured to an empty chair at their table. "Please sit down, Mr. Sterling," Mr. Williams said, his tone softening slightly. James sat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Mr. Williams leaned forward, his eyes locked on James's. "Your actions today were hurtful and disappointing," Mr. Williams began. "But I appreciate your coming to us with this apology. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "I believe in second chances, Mr. Sterling. Perhaps this can be a learning opportunity for you, and for the hotel as a whole." James looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "I want to do better," he said earnestly. "I want to make this right." Mr. Williams nodded slowly. "Then I'm offering you a chance to redeem yourself, Mr. Sterling. Are you willing to learn and grow from this experience?" James nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "Yes, Mr. Williams. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to learn and grow from this." Mr. Williams smiled gently. "Good. Starting tomorrow, you'll work alongside our labor staff. You'll perform the physically demanding tasks that you've overlooked as a manager." James's eyes widened, but he didn't protest. He knew this was his chance to make things right. "You'll clean rooms, scrub toilets, and carry heavy luggage," Mr. Williams continued. "This will help you understand the hard work our staff does every day." James nodded, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. "Additionally," Mr. Williams said, "you'll participate in community service. You'll work directly with people who have faced discrimination. This will open your eyes to their experiences." The next morning, James arrived at the hotel in work clothes instead of his usual suit. He reported to the housekeeping department, where he was handed cleaning supplies. As he scrubbed bathroom floors and changed bed linens, James felt the physical strain of the work. His back ached, and his hands grew sore. He realized how much he had taken for granted. During his lunch break, James sat with the housekeeping staff. He listened to their stories, learning about their lives and the challenges they faced. For the first time, he saw them as people, not just employees. After his shift at the hotel, James headed to a local community center. There, he helped serve meals to families affected by discrimination. He heard stories of struggle and resilience that moved him deeply. One elderly woman shared her experiences of facing prejudice throughout her life. As James listened, tears welled up in his eyes. He felt ashamed of his past behavior, but also inspired to do better. Day after day, James continued this new routine. The physical labor at the hotel and the emotional experiences at the community center began to change him. He started to see the world through different eyes. The next morning, James arrived at the hotel's service entrance feeling like a fish out of water. He was dressed in a plain work shirt and jeans, a far cry from his usual crisp suit and tie. As he walked into the staff locker room, he felt the eyes of his coworkers on him. "Mr. Sterling," a voice called out. It was Maria, one of the housekeepers he'd often seen but never really noticed before. "Are you lost?" James cleared his throat, his cheeks flushing. "No, I'm here to work with you today." Maria's eyebrows shot up, but she didn't question him further. Instead, she handed him a set of cleaning supplies and a list of rooms to tackle. As James pushed the heavy cleaning cart down the hallway, he felt a twinge in his back. He'd never realized how much physical effort went into this job. By the time he finished his first room, sweat was beading on his forehead, and his arms ached from scrubbing the bathroom tiles. During his lunch break, James sat awkwardly at a table in the staff cafeteria. He was used to dining in his office or at upscale restaurants. The chatter around him was lively, filled with jokes and stories he'd never been privy to before. "Hey, new guy," called out Juan, a maintenance worker James had barely spoken to in the past. "How's your first day going?" James managed a small smile. "It's eye-opening," he admitted. Juan laughed good-naturedly. "Yeah, it's not easy work, but we're all in it together, right?" As the day wore on, James found himself drawn into conversations with his coworkers. He learned about Maria's struggles to put her daughter through college, and how Juan worked 2 jobs to support his elderly parents. These weren't just nameless employees anymore. They were real people with real lives and challenges. By the end of his shift, James was exhausted. His muscles ached, and his hands were raw from cleaning. But as he watched his coworkers laughing and supporting each other despite their tiredness, he felt a newfound respect blooming in his chest. These were the people who kept the hotel running smoothly, day in and day out, often without recognition. As he hung up his work shirt in the locker room, James caught sight of his reflection in the mirror. He looked different somehow, humbled, but also more alive. He realized that this experience was changing him, opening his eyes to a world he'd been blind to for far too long. As the days passed, James found himself settling into a routine he never thought he'd experience. Each morning, he arrived at the hotel's service entrance, exchanging nods and brief greetings with his fellow workers. The physical demands of the job still took their toll, but James noticed his body gradually adjusting to the strain. One particularly busy afternoon, James was struggling with a stubborn stain on a carpet when Maria approached him. "Here," she said, handing him a different cleaning solution. "This works better on those tough spots." James looked up, surprised by her kindness. "Thanks, Maria. I appreciate it." Maria hesitated for a moment before adding, "You know, when you first showed up here, we all thought it was some kind of joke. But you're really trying, aren't you?" James nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "I am. I've learned a lot already." As the days turned into weeks, James found himself engaging more with his co-workers during breaks and lunches. He listened as they shared stories about their lives outside of work, the joys, the hardships, and everything in between. One day, as James was helping Juan fix a leaky faucet, he couldn't help but ask, "How do you manage working 2 jobs? It must be exhausting." Juan shrugged, tightening a bolt. "It's not easy, but what choice do I have? My parents need the extra money for their medical bills." James felt a pang of guilt, remembering how he'd once denied Juan's request for a raise without a second thought. "That must be really tough," he said softly. Juan looked at him, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Yeah, it is. But we make do. That's life, right?" As James worked alongside these men and women, he began to see the hotel through their eyes. He noticed the pride they took in their work, despite the lack of recognition. He saw how they supported each other through difficult shifts and personal struggles. One evening, as James was leaving work, he overheard a group of his co-workers discussing a colleague who had fallen ill. They were pooling money to help cover her medical expenses. Without hesitation, James reached for his wallet. "Please," he said, approaching the group, "let me contribute too." The others looked at him in surprise but accepted his offer with grateful nods. As James walked away, he felt a warmth in his chest, a sense of belonging he'd never experienced before in all his years at the hotel. The next morning, James arrived at the local shelter, his heart pounding with nervousness. He'd never been in a place like this before. The worn-down building seemed a world away from the luxury hotel he was used to managing. "Welcome," said a kind-faced woman at the entrance. "You must be James. I'm Sarah, the shelter coordinator." James nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, that's me. I'm here to help serve meals." Sarah showed him to the kitchen where he donned an apron and gloves. As he began ladling soup into bowls, James couldn't help but notice the diverse group of people lining up for food. An elderly man with weathered hands approached the counter. "Thank you, son," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "You're welcome, sir," James replied, feeling a lump in his throat. As the man moved away, Sarah leaned in. "That's Mr. Johnson. He lost his job due to age discrimination. Been coming here for months now." James felt a pang of guilt, remembering times he'd overlooked older job applicants at the hotel. A young woman with a small child came next. James smiled at the little boy who shyly hid behind his mother. "They fled from domestic violence," Sarah explained quietly. "We're helping them get back on their feet." James's mind flashed to times he'd been impatient with guests who seemed stressed or anxious. How many of them might have been dealing with similar struggles? As the evening wore on, James heard more stories of racial discrimination, of poverty, of illness and bad luck. Each tale touched him deeply, making him reflect on his own actions and attitudes. During a quiet moment, an older woman approached James. "You're new here, aren't you?" she asked gently. James nodded. "Yes, ma'am, it's my first time." She patted his hand. "Well, thank you for being here. It means a lot to us." Tears pricked at James's eyes. "I'm glad to help," he managed to say. As he continued serving, James felt a profound shift within himself. The people he'd once judged or dismissed were now real to him, individuals with hopes, dreams, and struggles. He realized how much his prejudices had blinded him to the humanity of others. As James continued his work at the shelter, each interaction left a lasting impression on him. The stories he heard and the faces he saw began to reshape his understanding of the world. He found himself thinking about these experiences long after he left the shelter each day. One afternoon, as James walked back to the hotel, he passed a homeless man on the street. In the past, he would have averted his eyes and hurried past. But this time, James stopped. He remembered Mr. Johnson from the shelter and how a simple act of kindness had brightened his day. "Excuse me, sir," James said, reaching into his pocket. "Would you like something to eat?" He offered the man a few dollars, making eye contact and smiling genuinely. The man looked up, surprised. "Thank you, mister. God bless you." As James continued on his way, he felt a warmth in his chest. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. At the hotel, James's interactions with the staff began to change. He found himself paying more attention to their lives and struggles. When Maria, a housekeeper, seemed upset one day, James took the time to ask if everything was all right. "It's my son," Maria explained hesitantly. "He's sick, and I'm worried about missing work to take care of him." In the past, James might have simply told her to find a replacement, but now he saw the situation differently. "Don't worry, Maria," he said gently. "Take the time you need. We'll make it work." The gratitude in Maria's eyes touched James deeply. He realized how much power he had to make a positive difference in people's lives. Even with guests, James's approach began to shift. When a flustered woman arrived at the front desk, clearly upset about something, James didn't immediately assume she was being difficult. Instead, He approached her with empathy. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" he asked kindly. "How can we help make your stay more comfortable?" The woman's tension visibly eased at his gentle tone. She explained that she was dealing with a family emergency and needed to extend her stay. James listened patiently and worked with her to find a solution. As days passed, James found himself becoming more aware of the diverse experiences and challenges faced by those around him. He began to see beyond surface appearances and first impressions, recognizing the complexity of each person's story. As James returned to the hotel each day, the experiences from the shelter and his labor work began to seep into his interactions with the staff. He found himself pausing before speaking, considering the impact of his words and actions. One morning, James noticed Tom, a bellhop looking particularly tired. Instead of his usual sharp reprimand about appearance, James approached him with concern. "Tom, are you feeling all right?" he asked gently. Tom looked startled. "I'm fine, Mr. Sterling, just didn't sleep well last night." James nodded sympathetically. "I understand. Why don't you take a short break? Grab a coffee and rest for a few minutes. I'll cover for you." Tom's eyes widened in surprise. "Really? Thank you, sir." As James took over Tom's duties, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He realized how much easier it was to work together when everyone felt respected and valued. In the kitchen, James overheard two chefs arguing about a menu change. In the past, he would have stormed in and demanded they sort it out immediately. This time, he took a deep breath and entered calmly. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, his tone curious rather than accusatory. The chefs explained their dilemma, and James listened attentively. He then helped them find a compromise, drawing on what he had learned about collaboration during his time with the labor staff. As days passed, the staff began to notice the change in James. Smiles replaced wary glances when he entered a room. People started to approach him with questions or concerns, no longer fearing his reaction. During a staff meeting, James surprised everyone by asking for their input on improving hotel operations. The room fell silent at first, but slowly, ideas began to flow. James listened to each suggestion with genuine interest, jotting down notes and thanking each person for their contribution. After the meeting, Sarah, a longtime receptionist, approached James. "Mr. Sterling," she said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say, it's been really nice working with you lately. You seem different." James felt a lump in his throat. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied softly. "I'm trying to be better. I've learned a lot recently about the importance of treating everyone with respect." Sarah smiled warmly. "Well, it shows, and we all appreciate it." As James walked away, he felt a sense of warmth and belonging he had never experienced before in the hotel. He realized that by opening his heart to others, he had created a more positive environment for everyone, including himself. James arrived at the industrial kitchen early in the morning, dressed in a simple uniform that matched the rest of the labor staff. The head chef, a burly man named Marco, greeted him with a nod. "Today we're deep cleaning the entire kitchen," Marco explained. "It's a big job, but we need to get it done before the dinner rush." James nodded, feeling a mix of determination and apprehension. He had never tackled such a physically demanding task before. The team got to work, and James found himself on his hands and knees, scrubbing the grease-caked floor tiles. His back ached and sweat dripped down his face as he worked. He glanced around, seeing the others working just as hard, their faces set in concentration. As the hours passed, James's muscles burned with exhaustion. He stood up to stretch, wincing at the pain in his lower back. That's when he noticed Sarah, one of the younger kitchen staff, struggling with a heavy pot. Without thinking, James rushed over to help her. "Here, let me give you a hand," he offered, grabbing the other side of the pot. Sarah looked surprised but grateful. "Thanks, Mr. Sterling," she said with a smile. As they worked together to clean the massive pot, James found himself chatting with Sarah. He learned about her dreams of becoming a chef and the long hours she put in to support her family. Throughout the day, James worked alongside different members of the staff. He listened to their stories, shared jokes, and felt a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. Despite the grueling work, there was laughter and a spirit of teamwork that filled the kitchen. By the end of the shift, James was utterly exhausted. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and his hands were raw from scrubbing. But as he looked around at the gleaming kitchen and the satisfied faces of his co-workers, he felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Marco approached James, a look of approval on his face. "Not bad for your first deep clean, Mr. Sterling," he said, clapping James on the shoulder. "You're one of us now." Those words struck James deeply. He realized that the respect and camaraderie he had experienced today were worth more than any fancy title or corner office. For the first time, he truly understood the value of every single person who contributed to the hotel's success. As the next morning arrives, James entered the hotel's conference room, feeling a mix of nervousness and curiosity. The diversity and inclusion workshop was about to begin, and he wasn't sure what to expect. As he took his seat, he noticed a diverse group of attendees from various departments of the hotel. The workshop facilitator, a warm and engaging woman named Dr. Amelia Chen, started the session with a simple exercise. She asked everyone to stand up and form groups based on various characteristics: eye color, birth month, and favorite food. James found himself shuffling between groups, sometimes feeling included, other times left out. "This exercise," Dr. Chen explained, "is a small taste of what it feels like to be included or excluded based on arbitrary factors. Now imagine feeling that way every day, in more significant ways." Her words hit James hard. He thought about how he had made the Williams family feel, and a wave of shame washed over him. As the workshop progressed, Dr. Chen shared statistics and personal stories about the impact of discrimination in the workplace. James listened intently, his eyes opening to realities he had never considered before. "Discrimination isn't always overt," Dr. Chen said. "Sometimes it's subtle, unintentional, but no less harmful." James felt a lump in his throat as he recognized some of his own past behaviors in her examples. He had never thought of himself as prejudiced, but now he was forced to confront the truth. The workshop then moved to small group discussions. James found himself in a group with Sarah from the kitchen staff and two other employees he didn't know well. They were tasked with sharing experiences of feeling excluded or discriminated against. As James listened to his colleagues' stories, he felt a deep sense of empathy growing within him. Sarah shared how she often felt overlooked for promotions despite her hard work, simply because English wasn't her first language. Another colleague, Mark, talked about the assumptions people made about his abilities because he used a wheelchair. When it was James's turn to share, he hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he opened up about his recent experiences working with the labor staff and at the shelter. He admitted to his past prejudices and how he was working to change. "I'm learning every day," James said, his voice thick with emotion, "and I'm sorry for any hurt I've caused in the past." The group responded with nods of understanding and words of encouragement. James felt a weight lifting off his shoulders as he embraced this new vulnerability. After the workshop, James found himself in the staff break room, his mind still reeling from the day's revelations. As he poured himself a cup of coffee, he noticed Miguel, one of the housekeeping staff, sitting alone at a small table. James hesitated for a moment, then approached. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Miguel looked up, surprised. "Of course, Mr. Sterling," he replied, a hint of wariness in his voice. As James sat down, he noticed the dark circles under Miguel's eyes. "Long day?" he asked gently. Miguel nodded. "Every day is long," he said with a tired smile. "But I'm grateful for the work." James felt a pang of guilt, remembering how he used to overlook the hard work of staff like Miguel. "I've been learning a lot lately about the challenges many of our staff face," he said. "Would you mind sharing your story with me?" Miguel studied James for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Well, Mr. Sterling, it hasn't been easy," he began. "I came to this country 10 years ago, dreaming of a better life. But the reality was much harder than I expected." As Miguel spoke, James listened intently. He heard about the discrimination Miguel faced when looking for housing, the struggle to find work without being taken advantage of, and the constant fear of being judged or mistreated because of his accent or appearance. "There were times," Miguel said, his voice barely above a whisper, when I felt like giving up. But I couldn't. I have a family to support back home." James felt a lump form in his throat. He thought about how he had treated guests like the Williams family, making snap judgments based on appearance. He realized that he had been part of the problem Miguel and others like him faced every day. "I'm so sorry, Miguel," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea. Thank you for sharing this with me." Miguel looked at James, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. "Thank you for listening, Mr. Sterling. It means a lot to be heard." As they continued to talk, James felt a profound shift within himself. The lessons he had been learning through his community service and labor work were suddenly very real and personal. He realized that change wasn't just about following new rules or attending workshops. It was about truly seeing and valuing each person as an individual with their own struggles and strengths. As James left the break room after his conversation with Miguel, he felt a weight on his shoulders, not of burden, but of responsibility. He walked through the hotel's grand lobby, his eyes taking in details he'd never noticed before. The way the cleaning staff meticulously polished every surface, the genuine smiles of the front desk team as they greeted guests, the careful attention of the bellhops as they handled luggage. He found a quiet corner and sat down, his mind swirling with thoughts. Over the past weeks, James had experienced a profound change. He remembered how he used to stride through these halls, filled with pride in his position and authority. Now that pride felt hollow compared to the sense of accomplishment he felt after a day of hard work alongside his coworkers. James thought about the people he'd met at the shelter, their stories of struggle and resilience. He recalled the aching muscles after long days of physical labor, and how those experiences had taught him to appreciate the efforts of every member of his staff. The diversity workshop had opened his eyes to biases he never knew he had, making him more aware of his words and actions. A small smile played on James's lips as he realized how much he had grown. The man who had rudely dismissed the Williams family seemed like a stranger now. In his place was someone who took the time to listen, to understand, and to care. James stood up, feeling a new sense of purpose. He knew there was still much to learn, but he was no longer afraid of that journey. Instead, he felt excited about the possibilities ahead, the chance to be a better leader, a more compassionate person, and a positive force for change in his community. As he walked towards the staff area, James felt a deep sense of gratitude for this opportunity to grow. He was determined to use his experiences to create a more inclusive and respectful environment at the hotel, starting with how he treated every single person he encountered. James found himself waking up earlier each day, eager to start his community service projects. As he arrived at the local shelter one morning, he noticed a flyer requesting volunteers for a neighborhood cleanup initiative. Without hesitation, he signed up and began spreading the word among his co-workers. "Hey, Miguel," James called out to his friend from the kitchen staff. "There's this cleanup project happening next weekend. I thought maybe we could get a group together to help out. What do you think?" Miguel looked surprised but pleased. "That sounds great, James. I'll ask around and see who else wants to join." On the day of the cleanup, James was amazed to see a sizable group of hotel staff members gathered, ready to work. As they picked up litter and cleared overgrown areas, James felt a sense of camaraderie he'd never experienced before. During their lunch break, James overheard two elderly residents talking about needing help with home repairs. He approached them with a warm smile. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear. I'd be happy to come by and take a look at what needs fixing. Maybe we could organize a team to help out." The grateful looks on their faces touched James deeply. He realized that these small acts of kindness were making a real difference in people's lives. Back at the shelter, James noticed that the food pantry was running low on supplies. He took the initiative to organize a food drive at the hotel, encouraging guests and staff to contribute. To his surprise, the response was overwhelming. As he helped sort through the donated items, one of the shelter volunteers patted him on the back. "You've really thrown yourself into this, haven't you, James? It's making a big difference around here." James felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm just trying to do my part," he said humbly. "There's so much more we can do to help our community." His enthusiasm was contagious, More and more of his coworkers began joining him in various volunteer activities. James found himself leading by example, showing up early, staying late, and always looking for new ways to contribute. One evening, as James was leaving the shelter after a long day of serving meals, he overheard two of his coworkers talking. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but James has really changed," one said. "He's not just doing this for show. He genuinely cares." The other nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's like he's a whole new person. I actually look forward to working with him now." James quietly slipped away, his heart full. He knew he still had a long way to go, but hearing those words made him realize that his efforts were truly making a difference, not just in the community, but in how others perceived him as well. As the final days of James's month-long journey of labor work and community service approached, he found himself filled with a mix of emotions. The once prideful hotel manager now looked at the world through different eyes, his heart softened by the experiences he had shared with his coworkers and the community. On his last day at the shelter, James arrived early, as had become his habit. He busied himself in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for the regulars he had come to know by name. As he stirred a large pot of oatmeal, he caught his reflection in the shiny surface of a nearby pot. The face looking back at him was different, not just physically with the slight tan from outdoor work and the muscles gained from manual labor, but in the eyes. They were kinder, more understanding. "James, my man," called out Marcus, one of the shelter's longtime volunteers. "We're sure gonna miss you around here. You've been a real blessing." James felt a lump form in his throat. "I'm going to miss being here too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've learned so much from all of you." As he served breakfast, James took extra time with each person, memorizing their faces and stories. He realized that what had started as a punishment had become a profound gift, the gift of perspective, empathy, and genuine human connection. Later that day, as James hung up his work uniform for the last time, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The calluses on his hands were a testament to the hard work he had put in, but the real changes were on the inside. He had discovered a strength he never knew he possessed, not in authority or control, but in kindness and understanding. Walking out of the employee locker room, James was surprised to find a group of his co-workers waiting for him. They had put together a small goodbye gathering, complete with a cake that read, "We'll miss you, James." Overwhelmed by their gesture, James felt tears prick his eyes. "I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Thank you all so much. You've taught me more than you could ever know." As James looked around at the faces of people he now considered friends, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The past month had changed him in ways he never thought possible, and he knew that these lessons would stay with him for the rest of his life. As James stepped back into the hotel lobby in his crisp manager's suit, he felt like a different person. The familiar sights and sounds of the luxury establishment now held new meaning for him. He took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and walked towards the front desk with purpose. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted the receptionist warmly. "How are you doing today?" Sarah looked up, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. I'm good, Mr. Sterling. Thank you for asking." James smiled genuinely. "I'm glad to hear that. And please, call me James." Throughout the day, James made a point to connect with each member of his staff. He listened attentively to their concerns, offered words of encouragement, and even rolled up his sleeves to help when things got busy. During the afternoon rush, James noticed a young family struggling with their luggage. Without hesitation, he approached them with a warm smile. "Welcome to our hotel. May I assist you with your bags?" The family looked taken aback but gratefully accepted his help. As James carried their suitcases, he engaged them in friendly conversation, making sure they felt comfortable and valued. In the kitchen, James took time to personally thank the chefs and dishwashers for their hard work. He remembered the grueling hours he had spent in their shoes, and now understood the importance of every role in the hotel. "Your dedication makes this place special," he told them sincerely. "I want you to know how much I appreciate each one of you." As the day progressed, word spread quickly about James's transformation. Employees who had once feared his stern demeanor now found themselves looking forward to interactions with him. Guests commented on the positive atmosphere that seemed to permeate the hotel. By the end of his shift, James felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had made a difference, not through rigid rules or harsh authority, but through kindness and understanding. As he prepared to leave, he paused to help an elderly guest with her coat, earning a grateful smile that warmed his heart. As the sun rose on a crisp morning, Mr. Williams stepped out of his sleek black car and into the hotel's grand entrance. This time, there was no hiding his identity. He was here as an openly recognized board member, ready to see the fruits of his unconventional approach to James's redemption. The lobby bustled with activity, guests checking in and out, staff moving with purpose. Mr. Williams stood back, observing the scene before him with keen eyes. He didn't have to wait long before he spotted James. James was at the front desk, his posture relaxed yet professional. A family was checking in, looking tired from their journey. Mr. Williams watched as James leaned in, speaking softly to the children who were fidgeting impatiently. "I bet you're excited to see your room, aren't you?" James said with a warm smile. "How about I have someone bring up some hot chocolate for you while your parents finish checking in?" The children's faces lit up and their parents looked relieved. Mr. Williams nodded approvingly, noticing the genuine care in James's eyes. As James moved away from the desk, he spotted an elderly woman struggling with her bags. Without hesitation, he approached her. "Ma'am, please allow me to help you with those," he offered gently. The woman looked up, surprised. "Oh, thank you, young man. That's very kind of you." James carefully took her bags, engaging her in friendly conversation as he escorted her to the elevator. Mr. Williams couldn't help but smile at the transformation he was witnessing. Throughout the morning, Mr. Williams observed James interacting with guests and staff alike. Gone was the cold, judgmental manager of before. In his place stood a man who treated everyone with respect and kindness, regardless of their appearance or status. James knelt down to tie a young boy's shoelace, helped a flustered businessman find his misplaced briefcase, and took time to personally thank the cleaning staff for their hard work. Each interaction was marked by a warmth and sincerity that touched Mr. Williams deeply. As James passed by, Mr. Williams stepped forward, ready to make his presence known. "Mr. Sterling," he called out, his voice carrying across the lobby. James turned at the sound of Mr. Williams's voice, his eyes widening in recognition. A mixture of emotions played across his face: respect, gratitude, and a touch of nervousness. He walked over to Mr. Williams, his posture straight but not stiff. "Mr. Williams," James said, his voice warm and sincere. "It's good to see you, sir." Mr. Williams smiled, extending his hand. "It's good to see you too, James. I've been watching you this morning. You've been quite busy." James shook Mr. Williams' hand firmly. "Would you like to talk somewhere more private?" he asked, gesturing towards a quiet corner of the lobby. As they settled into comfortable armchairs, James took a deep breath. "Mr. Williams, I can't thank you enough for what you've done for me. The opportunity you gave me, it changed my life." Mr. Williams nodded, his eyes kind. "I'm glad to hear that, James. But the change came from within you. You did the hard work." James's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I was so wrong before, so blind. The time I spent working with the staff, serving in the community, it opened my eyes. I saw the world differently for the first time." "That's what growth is all about," Mr. Williams said softly. "Seeing beyond our own experiences, understanding others." "I'm grateful every day," James continued. "Not just for keeping my job, but for the chance to become a better person. I hope I can make a real difference here now." Mr. Williams leaned forward, his expression serious but warm. "James, you already are. I've seen how you interact with the guests, how you treat the staff. There's a new atmosphere in this hotel. People feel valued, respected. That's because of you." James blinked rapidly, touched by Mr. Williams's words. "Thank you, sir." I promise to keep learning, to keep growing. I want to make sure everyone who comes through those doors feels welcome and respected." Inspired by his transformative journey, James felt a surge of motivation to create lasting change at the hotel. He spent several evenings brainstorming ideas, drawing from his experiences and the lessons he had learned. Finally, with a sense of purpose and excitement, he scheduled a meeting with Mr. Williams to present his proposal. As they sat in the hotel's conference room, James laid out his plans for a new initiative focused on diversity, inclusion, and respect. His ease shone with enthusiasm as he explained, "Mr. Williams, I believe we have an opportunity to make our hotel a model of inclusivity in the hospitality industry." Mr. Williams leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on, James. I'm listening." James took a deep breath and began outlining his ideas. "First, I propose mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff members, from housekeeping to management. This would cover topics like unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and respectful communication." He continued, "We could also implement a mentorship program, pairing employees from different backgrounds to foster understanding and collaboration. And I think it's crucial that we review our hiring practices to ensure we're attracting and retaining a diverse workforce." Mr. Williams nodded approvingly, encouraging James to continue. "For our guests," James went on, his voice growing more confident, "I suggest creating a welcome package that celebrates diversity. It could include information about local cultural events and restaurants representing various cuisines. We could also partner with local minority-owned businesses to offer exclusive experiences to our guests." James paused, then added softly, "And most importantly, we need to establish a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, whether it's from staff or guests. Everyone who walks through our doors should feel valued and respected." Mr. Williams sat back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. "James, I'm impressed. This initiative shows real thought and commitment. It's clear you've taken your experiences to heart." James felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. "Thank you, sir. I truly believe this can make a difference, not just for our hotel, but for our community as well." The hotel's board of directors convened for their quarterly meeting, with James's initiative as a key item on the agenda. Mr. Williams presented the proposal, his voice filled with pride as he recounted James's remarkable transformation and the positive changes already taking place at the hotel. As the board members listened intently, their faces showed a mix of surprise and admiration. They hadn't expected such a comprehensive and thoughtful plan from a manager who, just months ago, had been known for his rigid and sometimes insensitive approach. When Mr. Williams finished his presentation, there was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, the board members began to voice their support. They recognized the potential for the initiative to not only improve the hotel's reputation, but also to set a new standard in the hospitality industry. "This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we need," said one board member, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's not just good for our image, it's the right thing to do." Another board member nodded in agreement. "I'm impressed by the depth of this initiative. It's clear that James has put a lot of thought and heart into this." The vote was unanimous. The board fully endorsed the program, allocating a substantial budget to ensure its success. They saw it as an investment in the hotel's future and a step towards creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment for both guests and staff. Mr. Williams turned to James, who had been waiting anxiously outside the boardroom. "James," he said, his voice warm with approval. "The board was extremely impressed. They've given us the green light to move forward with the initiative." James's face lit up with joy and relief. "That's wonderful news, Mr. Williams. Thank you for your support." Mr. Williams placed a hand on James's shoulder. "There's more, James. The board wants you to lead this initiative. They believe your personal journey and newfound perspective make you the ideal person to drive this change." James felt a mix of excitement and nervousness at the prospect. "I'm honored, sir, but it's a big responsibility. Are you sure I'm ready?" Mr. Williams smiled reassuringly. "You've shown tremendous growth, James. And don't worry, I'll be there to guide you every step of the way. We'll make this initiative a success together." James threw himself into implementing the new initiative with enthusiasm and dedication. He worked tirelessly to develop a comprehensive program that would address diversity, inclusion, and respect at every level of the hotel's operations. The first step was to organize a series of workshops for the hotel staff. James knew from his own experience how powerful these sessions could be in changing perspectives and fostering understanding. He brought in expert facilitators and worked closely with them to tailor the content to the specific needs of the hotel. On the day of the first workshop, James felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. He stood at the front of the room facing a sea of curious and somewhat skeptical faces. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "I know some of you might be wondering why we're here," James said, his voice steady and sincere. "A few months ago, I wouldn't have understood either. But I've learned that creating a truly welcoming environment for everyone isn't just good business. It's the right thing to do." As James shared his personal journey and the lessons he had learned, he could see the staff's expressions softening. Many nodded in recognition of their own experiences or those of their colleagues. The workshops covered a range of topics, from recognizing unconscious bias to effective communication across cultures. Role-playing exercises helped staff practice handling difficult situations with empathy and respect. To James's relief and joy, the program was well received. After each session, staff members would approach him, sharing their own stories and insights. Some even thanked him for creating a space where they felt heard and valued. As the weeks passed, James began to notice a shift in the hotel's atmosphere. Staff members were more attentive to guests' diverse needs, and there was a new sense of camaraderie among employees from different departments. Guests noticed the change too. Comments began to pour in, praising the hotel for its welcoming environment and exceptional service. Many mentioned how they felt truly respected and valued during their stay. One day, as James was walking through the lobby, he overheard a conversation between two guests. "You know," one was saying, "I've stayed in a lot of hotels, but there's something special about this place. Everyone here seems genuinely happy to be working together." James couldn't help but smile. It was moments like these that made all the hard work worthwhile. He knew there was still much to do, but he could see that they were on the right path. James's transformation didn't stop at the hotel doors. As he continued to grow and learn, he felt a deep desire to make a positive impact beyond his workplace. He began to explore ways he could use his position and newfound understanding to advocate for equality and inclusion in the broader community. One sunny afternoon, James attended a local community meeting. As he listened to residents discuss their concerns, he realized how much his perspective had changed. Issues that he once would have dismissed as unimportant now resonated deeply with him. After the meeting, James approached the organizers. "I'd like to help," he said, his voice filled with determination. "Is there anything I can do?" The organizers were thrilled to have someone with James's experience and resources on board. They quickly put him to work, helping to plan outreach programs and fundraising events. James threw himself into these new projects with the same energy he had applied to transforming the hotel. He organized job fairs at the hotel, inviting members of underserved communities to apply for positions. He worked with local schools to create internship programs, giving young people from diverse backgrounds a chance to experience the hospitality industry. As word of James's efforts spread, he was invited to speak at community events. At first, he felt nervous standing in front of crowds, sharing his story of personal growth. But as he saw the impact his words had on others, he grew more confident. "We all have the power to make a difference," James would say, his eyes shining with passion. "It starts with opening our hearts and minds to understand and respect each other." James's involvement in the community didn't go unnoticed. Local newspapers began to write articles about the hotel manager who was working to bridge divides and create opportunities for all. But for James, the real reward was in the small moments: the grateful smile of a young intern, the tears in the eyes of a community elder who felt heard for the first time. The hotel's transformation under James's leadership didn't go unnoticed. As word spread about the positive changes, the establishment began to receive recognition for its efforts in promoting diversity and inclusion. Industry publications and local media outlets alike praised the hotel's innovative approach to creating a welcoming environment for all. One sunny morning, James arrived at work to find an envelope on his desk. Inside was an invitation to a prestigious hospitality awards ceremony. The hotel had been nominated for Best Diversity and Inclusion Initiative in the industry. James felt a mix of pride and humility as he read the nomination letter. He knew that this achievement wasn't his alone. It belonged to every staff member who had embraced the changes and worked hard to make the hotel a more inclusive place. At the award ceremony, James sat nervously among his peers. When the announcer called out the hotel's name as the winner, the room erupted in applause. James made his way to the stage, his heart pounding. "This award isn't just for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's for every member of our staff who has worked tirelessly to create a welcoming environment for all our guests. And it's for every guest who has shared their story and helped us learn and grow." Back at the hotel, the staff celebrated the win with a small party. James watched as employees from all departments mingled, laughing and chatting. He couldn't help but notice how different the atmosphere was compared to when he first started his journey. The positive changes were reflected in more than just awards. Guest satisfaction scores had skyrocketed, with many visitors specifically mentioning the warm and inclusive environment in their reviews. Staff morale was at an all-time high, with employee turnover rates dropping significantly. One day, as James was walking through the lobby, he overheard a conversation between two guests. "I've stayed at many hotels," one was saying, "but I've never felt as welcome as I do here. It's like they truly see and value each person who walks through their doors." James smiled to himself, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. This was the real measure of their success, not awards or recognition, but the genuine happiness and comfort of their guests and staff. James stood by the large window in his office, gazing out at the bustling city below. The setting sun cast a warm glow over the skyline, mirroring the warmth he felt in his heart. He let out a deep sigh, marveling at how much had changed in such a short time. His eyes fell on a framed photo on his desk, a group picture of the hotel staff, all smiling and standing arm in arm. It was a stark contrast to the tense, formal photos of the past. James picked up the frame, running his thumb over the faces of his coworkers. No, his friends. He thought back to the day the Williams family had checked in, remembering the harsh words he had spoken and the assumptions he had made. The memory still stung, but it no longer filled him with shame. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far he had come. James reflected on the grueling days of physical labor, the eye-opening experiences at the shelter, and the heartfelt conversations with his coworkers. Each moment had chipped away at his prejudices, replacing them with empathy and understanding. He thought about how these changes had seeped into his personal life. His relationships with family and friends had deepened as he learned to listen more and judge less. He found himself more patient with strangers, more curious about their stories, and more willing to lend a helping hand. As he set the photo back on his desk, James realized that the lessons he had learned weren't just about running a hotel or being a better manager. They were about being a better human being. The compassion and inclusivity he now championed at work had become an integral part of who he was. James smiled to himself, feeling a sense of peace and purpose that he had never known before. He knew that his journey was far from over. There was always more to learn, more ways to grow, but he was grateful for how far he had come and excited for what lay ahead. James stood at the podium, his heart full of emotion as he gazed out at the crowd gathered in the hotel's grand ballroom. The room was decorated with vibrant colors and inspirational messages, reflecting the spirit of unity and inclusion that had become the hotel's hallmark. "Welcome everyone to our celebration of diversity and inclusion," James began, his voice warm and sincere. "A year ago, I wouldn't have imagined standing here, hosting such an event. But thanks to some very special people, I've learned the true value of embracing our differences and treating everyone with respect and dignity." His eyes found Mr. Williams and his family seated at a table near the front. Mr. Williams nodded encouragingly, a proud smile on his face. James felt a surge of gratitude for the man who had given him the chance to change. As James continued his speech, he shared stories of the transformations he had witnessed throughout the hotel, from the newfound camaraderie among staff to the heartwarming feedback from guests who felt truly welcomed and valued. "This initiative isn't just about policies or training," James explained. "It's about opening our hearts and minds to each other. It's about seeing the humanity in every person who walks through our doors or works alongside us." The room erupted in applause as James concluded his speech. He stepped down from the podium, feeling both humbled and elated. As he made his way through the crowd, he was met with warm handshakes, heartfelt hugs, and words of appreciation from staff and guests alike. When he reached the Williams family, Mr. Williams stood up and extended his hand. "James," he said, his voice filled with pride, "you've exceeded all our expectations. This isn't just a success for the hotel, it's a testament to the power of personal growth and compassion." James shook Mr. Williams' hand, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "Thank you, sir," he replied, "for everything. You gave me a chance when I didn't deserve one, and it changed my life." Mrs. Williams smiled warmly at James. "And in doing so, you've changed the lives of so many others," she added. As the celebration continued around them, with laughter, music, and joyful conversation filling the air, James felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He looked around at the diverse faces in the room, staff members, guests, and community partners, all coming together in a spirit of unity and respect. If you enjoyed the story of James and the Williams family, I hand-picked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.